What's up, YouTube? Welcome back. I'm here to address a comment that came through our comment section. It was more of a question and a comment, but I want to take care of this here on video for you instead of just answer it, because I think it's a really important topic, and if some people don't understand or know what this is all about, we're here to show you today. Basically what it's going to be is closing bolts on live ammunition, as in this, but doing it in a safe direction, and why we do it in a safe direction. So again, closing bolts in a safe direction when you have live ammunition in the gun, like this. We're pointed at the ground. If a bullet were to come out of this barrel for some reason, it's going to hit the safe direction, the ground. So we're going to talk about that, but we're also going to address how dangerous it is when people do close bolts on live ammunition when they're not in a safe direction. Like, let's say up in the air where they could mortar something. This is a completely empty gun, so nothing will happen, but this is what I'm talking about, is the bad stuff. And also very commonly seen with handguns, like that. And another one that's probably less thought about but pretty serious in my book is this. And one more that kind of gets me a little bit is that. So let's get to the absolute facts real quick. These cartridges that we put into these firearms, they have something called a primer. The primer is the ignition source for this ammunition. It's what ignites the propellant, the main propellant, the powder, and pushes that bullet out of the barrel. The thing about primers is they're not always perfect. And we know, like any other mechanical device, firearms can malfunction. The easiest way for me to show you is here on this bolt face for this AR-15 bolt carrier group, and what it shows you is an ejector, but also it shows you the firing pin right in the center. That firing pin could get stuck. It happens in all sorts of firearms for one reason or another, and we'll talk about those, but those things get stuck and those things strike primers sometimes abnormally, and that could be on the closing of a bolt, the running of a slide, the closing of a shotgun action, any of those things, and if that happens, that has the potential to set that round off. You can see here the firing pin in its retracted position, but really quickly, with just a tap on the table, you can now see it protruding. So on AR-15 specifically, they're not captively held back, they're floating. And just to really quickly show you how closely we actually ride the line with these primers sometimes, I'm going to load this live ammunition, this round that I showed you before, with the primer that appears to be not struck. We're going to load this in a magazine, we're going to load it into the firearm, we're just going to drop the bolt, and then we're going to examine the bullet, or the cartridge. So notice that primer is, like I said, clean looking. It does not have a strike mark on it. We're going to go ahead and enter that into our, by the way, this is a YouTube compliant magazine for certain. We're going to enter that into the CMMG Mark IV, and we have an open bolt right now. We're going to close the bolt in the safe direction. All right, I'm going to remove that source of ammunition, and I'm going to pop out that round. And what you're going to notice is a strike mark. No matter if I get that gunk off of it, you are going to see in the center of that primer, there is a tiny little dent. And that is because of that floating firing pin that just tapped it just a tiny little hair upon closing that bolt. Now, if that's not a clear indication of how close we could be riding that line sometimes, I don't know what is. But here's another one. So military contract ammunition, as far as I understand, requires the use of what are called NATO primers. We have here two versions of CCI primers that are for small rifles. Now, this is what we usually get on the commercial market, small rifle primers number 400. These are just standard small rifle primers. But the military primers, it says 4.556 millimeter ammunition, small rifle military primers. Like I said, this is known as NATO primers. Now, from what I understand, I don't know if this is 100% true, but the way I understand it is that the NATO primers have a little bit harder of a cup. That way, if these rifles do close bolts, especially in semi or fully automatic fire, when they're slamming home, supposedly it's not so susceptible to having a fire pin actually detonate one of those primers. We don't want those things to happen, especially in a sequence of ammunition where we could have a runaway chain fire effect. But it is actually recommended that if you're going to run semi-automatic AR-15 style weapons or modern sporting rifles, that you do use a harder cup primer like a NATO primer. It's not totally required, but it's been recommended as far as I understand. Another thing I want to show you about primers is that they're supposed to be at least flush with the bottom of the case, or maybe even set a little bit indented so that they're not proud. Proud would mean that they are sticking out. This one is definitely not proud. This one's already struck, but let me show you one that I constructed that is proud. So maybe for some reason the factory just didn't get it right, and that primer is actually sticking up a little bit. You'll see at some point when I turn, right there is where you'll see it. It's actually not fully inserted. Now, your gun slamming home, that bolt could actually set that thing into motion, and through kinetic energy or whatever, that could get the anvil to crack, and that could set the gun off. So we don't want proud primers for a multitude of reasons, but that's one of them right there in my opinion. And also remember about primers is that these things are just little constructed pieces of metal with a compound. Things can go wrong with them also. There's something called an anvil right here in the middle, and what that does is that pinches the compound between the anvil and the cup right here, and with that pinch there's sometimes little things like maybe ground glass or other things that it crushes, and that's how it creates the spark. So if something is wrong with the anvil, maybe it's set extra, rough, or maybe extra close, a number of things that could go wrong, or maybe there could be something wrong with the compound. An example of that would be, we don't know why these expansion ballistics primers, we don't know why they didn't function good in our tests, but they just were hard to strike. We had to only pretty much use 1911 hammer-fired guns, or revolvers, I think, to set these things off. Striker-fired semi-automatics were not strong enough to set them off. But it could be the total opposite. A batch of primers could come off the line that could be extremely easy to set off. All right, so hopefully some of us have learned a lot real quick right there, but let's just go ahead back to the fundamental 4 safety rules, or the main 4 safety rules of firearms real quick. And yes, I have them in front of me so I can read them just like you see them on the screen. Number 1, always keep the gun pointed in a safe direction. Number 2, treat guns as though they are always loaded. 3, keep your finger out of the trigger until your sights are on your intended target. And 4, always be sure of your target and what's beyond it. So know your target, what's beyond it, and I always say what's in between you and your target. There's different versions of these rules, but basically that's what it is. Keep your finger off the trigger until you need it, and always keep it pointed at a safe direction. Remember that one right there. Always keep it pointed at a safe direction. So people think that you need your finger to be on the trigger for a gun to go off. That is completely false. Like I said, mechanical things fail. Now, if we follow the rule of never point it at an unsafe direction, and we treat it like it's loaded all the time, and we're always aware of where our backstop is, or things beyond our backstop, or at least beyond the barrel of our muzzle, we should be pretty good. And that would include chambering on live ammunition. There's no reason to break that rule just because. I don't understand it, and it actually really does irritate me. I'm guilty of it myself every now and then. We all make mistakes, but I do see it a lot on the tubes. I see people constantly doing it during reloads, and yes, in certain situations it could be safe, but in most of these situations we're seeing, it's absolutely not safe. I'm going to real quick run through a handful of different firearms like we showed you in the intro, because it's not only applicable to AR-15 style weapons. This was actually an AK-47 that someone mentioned this on. It was about the AK-47 ammo from PSA. They noticed that I was always pointing down at the ground when I rechambered a new round out of the magazine, and they wanted to know why. So that's what made this whole video even happen. Let's go through a couple other guns real quick. So here in this handgun, this M&P 9mm, you'll notice there's a firing pin channel and a firing pin resting in it. It's not protruding, but things could make it protrude. Let's say it was just dirty, junky, gunky, it hasn't been cleaned and something's blocking it up, or maybe there was a popped primer you didn't notice, or multiple popped primers, and it's loading little discs of primer material down into that firing pin channel, eventually wanting to make it go ahead and hang up. If that firing pin for some reason is protruded, if we drop that slide, we would like to be in a safe direction. Speaking of firing pin channels being blocked, let's talk about a notorious rifle for that, supposedly. It's never happened to me, but the SKS. Very common rifle, but for some reason that I'm not sure of at the moment, this gun is known to actually slam fire on its own no matter what, but on top of that, these guns come covered in cosmoline a lot, so there could be a lot of cosmoline down there inside that firing pin channel that could totally gunk the works up. When that stuff is on there for a long time, trust me, it's very thick. So there is a good chance that when you buy military surplus guns like this, the firing pin channel could totally be clogged up with cosmoline. And if you don't take the care to clean it out, well, then we wouldn't want to put a round in there and try to fire it aiming at the sky. In other words, when we go ahead and load it and we're going to go ahead and drop it, we want to do it like that, pointed at a safe direction. Let's pull this round out and see if it did have a firing pin strike on it at all. The very faintest of a touch of a firing pin. But if that thing was protruding, you better believe it would go off. But what about the single shot rifle where you just hammer back, no problem, right? Well, I wouldn't say so. I would say you definitely want to be in a safe direction. This one here is chambered in 500 Bushwhacker. That is a massive cartridge right there. I would not want that going off in a non-safe direction. So if you were to have that gun loaded, which it's not, of course, but for some reason, maybe say a scope got in the way of your finger a little bit. I don't know if it's possible, but I would hate to start messing around and accidentally slipping off of that, and for any reason setting that gun off. And even with revolvers, I think it's important. We have here a 500 Bushwhacker revolver. We would hate for that thing to go off in the wrong direction. But even with this gun, any revolver actually, you have the possibility of slipping off the hammer. Now, would that actually set off a round? I'm not sure. I don't want to take my chances. I'll aim it at the ground. And we can never forget about the all too famous shotgun. Everybody likes to look cool with their shotguns, load them up, and put one in the chamber. Well, be careful. So in my opinion, right back to where we started. Anytime you have a major manipulation of a firearm, even if it's something like moving the safety around, be in a safe direction. So it doesn't even have to be major manipulation, but just, regular, anytime you're functioning some sort of a part of that firearm, you should probably be in a safe direction, even with guns you wouldn't typically think of. This is a CVA Buckhorn muzzle loader. So I was sitting in a tree stand one morning, I just climbed up there and I was getting ready to hunt. It was right before the sun was gonna come up. I had a 209 primer in there. It was packed up, ready to go. And I'm not joking, I did not have my finger on the trigger, but when I got nice and settled in, I was holding the gun just like this, and there's a safety right here. So all I did was, it was already in the safe position. The gun was cocked back like that. All I did was take the safety off. Boom, and the gun fired up into the air. That was not a safe direction. I don't know where that round came down at, and it could have come right down on the top of my head. But that was an example of I was not in a safe direction when I manipulated the firearm, and it went off. Now I know that sounds like some total Alec Baldwin crap right there, but it's true. My finger was not on the trigger. So remember, guns are awesome, but they can be extremely dangerous. You have to be really aware of what's going on around you and with what you're doing. I know this isn't going to be a super popular video. We're not blowing up watermelons or anything like that. We have a really loud something in the tree trying to overtalk me. But I wanted to make the video. It was a good comment in the question form or the comment form. I don't even know the tone that it was actually written in. You can't tell that from text. But it was a good comment, and I thought we had to make this video. I hope you learned something. If you know somebody else that might benefit from this video, please share it with them. Give it a thumbs up. Thank you for watching this video. Hope to see you next time. And until then, stay safe, have fun, and keep shooting.